Good evening, Pub Theologians. How are you? Good to see you today. We are back, and it was an interesting few weeks here in San Antonio. I hope everyone is safe and getting back to normal. I know our city went through a really, really big freeze in some chaotic times, and so we are grateful to be here with you today. I know that I was working one of the shelters in downtown San Antonio for 10 days, and I'm just so proud of our city and all the nonprofits and all the citizens that came out and volunteered, not only in our homeless shelters, but in warming centers and places, and neighbors taking neighbors in and helping us get through these really unprecedented times that we just went through. But we are back here at Pub Theology. It is a great place to have a conversation, to grab a beer. We're usually at the Friendly Spot Ice House, but since COVID, we've been doing various forms of Pub Theology online, and you can join us online at Facebook or YouTube, or watch this and share this video later anytime. And it's a great place to have a conversation about our community, our faith in creating the common good. And I'm here with a good friend of mine that I've known for maybe about 5 or 6 years through acquaintances and through politics of San Antonio, and that is TJ Mays. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you, TJ. TJ is the host of On the Record, a KLRN program here in San Antonio. He's also a local lawyer of his new firm. And also, previously, that you served as chief of staff for Councilman Ron Nirenberg when he was the District 8 council person. And then you moved over to be the chief of staff for Judge Wolff and did that for a few years. So you've had a great career. Tell us a little bit how you got started in your life. And this conversation is just going to be an organic conversation. I know you have a lot of things to talk about faith, about our community, about creating the common good. But one thing you said, and when we started this conversation, one of your favorite quotes you said to me was, "You can't change the world, but you can change the world around you," which is a very localized way to see the world you live in. The best way you can be a loving neighbor to those around you is to actually serve your neighbor. A lot of people in church, they'll say, "Oh, love your neighbor," right? What does the neighbor mean? Oh, it means everybody in the world. And I think that's a okay answer. It doesn't not mean that. But I actually think it means much more personal. It actually means your neighbor. Your neighbor is a specific term. Neighbor is not somebody far away. It's somebody close to you. And I think you really love to be closely tied to your community, serving the common good, trying to figure out ways to solve problems that face us, whether that's through your communal life or through your political life or your work life. So tell us a little bit how you grew up, where you grew up, what formed you to where you are now in your career as a lawyer and also just in politics.
I like to say I'm North San Antonio, born and raised.
Okay.
And Oak Meadow is where I spent most of my days growing up. So Oak Meadows at Huebner Northwest Military, it's a really special neighborhood. My mom still lives there. It's in District 8, on the edge of District 8. I went to Jackson Middle School, where I learned how to play jazz music from Andy Post, who's now at the Youth Orchestra of San Antonio.
Yeah.
And then I ended up in the band at Churchill and just had a ball there. And went to Texas Tech for college, and that's where I got an interest in politics. I did an internship on the Hill for a guy named Chet Edwards, who was a Democrat who represented Waco and College Station.
That's right. He was actually my representative when I went to Baylor University.
I bet he was, yeah. And so Crawford Ranch was in his district. So at the time, George W. Bush was president, and his congressman was a Democrat, Chet Edwards, and I worked for him, and that was a really cool experience, and I really just got a love for it there.
Okay.
Went to SMU for law school. And moved back to San Antonio the day after law school graduation, and have been here ever since. And I worked on campaigns in law school. I wrote speeches and kind of paid my light bill that way.
Sure.
And then ended up volunteering on a Dallas City Council race my last semester of law school, and just fell in love with local politics because of the organic nature of it, because it's where the rubber meets the road. And you really get to know the issues. And I mean, people will confront you at the HEB about it. So
sure.
You can't BS your way out of it. And so when I moved back here, I decided I wanted to get involved with local politics. But San Antonio has a very insular political community, and you really got to break in. So I was working at an engineering firm working on ERCOT reliability regulations for a year, advocating on behalf of 25 utilities at the Public Utility Commission of Texas and ERCOT, and learned the reliability framework for regulation and law really well. Had some big clients, and had a really good time learning that because it's so important. And then that was 2012. We knew it was a ticking time bomb, something like what happened last week. The people who study that grid know it's a ticking time bomb. At that time, I was volunteering for the Summerfield HOA president, who was a jazz station associate general manager who was running for District 8. He was an underdog, and his name was Ron Nirenberg. And we would go to National Night Out and neighborhood events and got to know him really well. And so when he was elected in the runoff in 2013, I joined his staff and have sort of been in the fight, in the arena ever since.
Wow. So you joined pretty early on in his runoff when he finally made it to the runoff. If you remember,
I joined him in June of 2012. So
wow.
that was like right after he filed his paperwork.
Wow. So you saw that rise of our current mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And then he became mayor, right? And then after he became mayor, you moved to Judge Wolff.
So it's funny. I was working for him, and I was just sort of thinking, whenever he ran for mayor, I was going to run for District 8. And that was the plan.
Okay.
And so I left his office, and I was in a private law practice working for Monique Diaz, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
She was doing municipal
She was on here just a few weeks ago talking about
she's a great leader in our community, especially on domestic violence. And she recruited me to her firm. So I was a city attorney in Carrizo Springs and Poteet and Pearsall, writing city charters and ordinances and all sorts of wild stuff. And I was planning my race. And then I got a call from a friend of mine, Marcy Ripper, and she was leaving Judge Wolff's office as chief of staff. And I went in and interviewed with him, and Judge Wolff moves quick. So within like 2 days, I was starting as chief of staff for Judge Wolff. What I told him in my interview was that working for Ron Nirenberg was a bachelor's degree in local government. Working for Nelson Wolff would be a PhD.
Wow.
And so there was some concern that I was going to use that job in his office as a launching pad to run for office. And I told Tracy, I said, I'm a former jazz musician. I just go with the flow, and there's not really a whole big of a plan to it. I'll play it and then I'll tell you about it. That's what Miles Davis said, the king of cool. And I like that philosophy. So I ended up in Judge Wolff's office, was there for 3 years, and then was an attorney in private practice for 2 years, and have been really involved with the community probably ever since my daughter was born in 2017. I mean, that really grounded my wife, Laura, who's a chief communications strategist at the city, and me, and really got us really laser tight focused in on the community that we're building together with our neighbors for her.
Wow. And then shortly, maybe about a year or two ago, you took over the KLRN program On the Record.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's a weekly program. Tell us about how that journey's been, and tell us about your show that's on tomorrow.
So tomorrow night we've taped this morning. That's why I'm dressed up. We have Paula Gold Williams. We have Fix SAPD. We have the San Antonio River Authority talking about the San Pedro Creek Culture Park. We have Ben Olivo talking about homelessness. We talk about you. And then we have Sanford Nowlin talking about ERCOT regulation. So
wow, it's a thick show.
It's a thick show. It's heavy on policy, but we like to keep it entertaining and fast moving. And we try to keep the guests as diverse as possible and the subject matter as diverse as possible. My first interview as host of that show was like 2 days after Judge Wolff and Mayor Nirenberg announced the shelter-in-place order. I had a 27-minute interview with Ron Nirenberg about that, because we had the social distancing, so we didn't have all the segments, and it was just 27 minutes straight of interviews. So that was learning to swim in the deep end. But it was a great interview, and it's become a great experience. And I've been there almost a year now. So
what is it like now being a journalist in a way? Like you moved into this kind of form of journalism.
It's different because I had been on TV on the opioid issue, on other issues, and doing the interviewing is actually harder, because you have to set the tone and set the pace, and you have to know what's going on and know when they're kind of being weaselly with you on their answers and when they're not. And then also keeping in mind who your audience is, because every show is a different audience, and what are they going to be interested in, and how do you help your guests connect with your audience in a way that's meaningful for both parties. And managing that has taken some time. I'm not quite there yet, but 1% better every day is my philosophy.
Now, no getting around it here. Who's been your most interesting, like surprise, interesting person you've interviewed?
That is a good question that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah,
you beat me there.
Somebody you had on that was just, it kind of surprised you. Like, this is a really interesting conversation. Maybe your favorite guest. Who was your favorite guest?
I don't know. Dr. Henrich at UT Health.
Okay.
We had him on for a long interview at the beginning of the pandemic, and we talked a lot about the research. And this is in May, so the research was raw. But we had a great conversation about the research, about the effect of COVID on healthcare workers, about the economic impact, about the sociological impact. He's a really smart guy. He's an old family friend. I've known him since I was 19 years old. And he was a really great interview, really polished, and he knew his stuff. And that was like my second or third episode. But I think he's probably been the most captivating from my perspective. But we always love to have the mayor on. We love to have the sheriff on.
Sure.
I mean, those kind of staples. Chief McManus, when George Floyd, I call it murder, but when the George Floyd killing happened, we had an episode where we had Chief McManus, followed by Camilla Factory, followed by I think Mayor Nirenberg. So it was just it was a special hour-long episode, and that was the Black Lives Matter episode, and it was that was compelling to do, and it's really emotional to do
For sure
a show like that, because it's just emotionally raw for everybody from different perspectives. It's definitely more some than others.
Well, my favorite Pup Theology was actually our very last one, where we hosted Camilla Factory, Dorian Williams, and an author named Jen Hatmaker from Austin, and they had a conversation during Dream Week. It's fascinating. Go check it out. You can watch any of our past Pup Theologies, or you can go to KLRN and watch any past On the Record with TJ. Go check us out online. Share this video as much as you can to kind of keep this conversation in our community going. Now, I know I've watched your show a few times, and I've had friends on that, Sylvia Foster-Frau, different people I know that have been on your show. And the topics you talk about are not just topics that the public's interested in. You're interested in them. They're concerns of yours. They're issues that you care about. Since you've been with now our future mayor, Ron, like when you're working with us as a council person, when you're with Judge Wolff, what issues boiled up to you that you became really concerned about in our community?
So in Mayor Nirenberg's office, I was, because of my time in the utility space, I was learning about the rural broadband deficiencies, because most of my clients were rural.
Yeah.
So we were talking about broadband in the District 8 office a lot. And then Councilman Nirenberg was a key leader on that. And that, to me, you solve the digital divide, you solve a lot of other problems. We haven't solved it yet, but we're getting closer. And there's been some good movement from the federal government, from the city, from the state on the broadband issue. I was really interested in parks, which was kind of one of the plot twists of my life. I was really overweight, and I started running and lost like 70 pounds. And I ran on the Salado Creek Greenway and through Hardburger Park. And so parks became a big thing that was interesting to me, in the Aquifer Protection Program as well. So those are sort of the things I was focused on. But at City Hall, the great thing about working at City Hall, and my wife does it now every day, is you just never know what's going to pop up. It's everything. It's Planned Parenthood wants to build an abortion clinic, and there's a zoning case. It's there's a non-discrimination ordinance while we were there. There's a CPS rate increase. There's a Vista Ridge pipeline for saws. There's collective bargaining for the police. So it's just, you have to learn issues really quick, and it's fast paced. And that's what I liked about it. And then, Ron Nirenberg is such an intellectual guy that you really can sit there and have some conversations about policy. And I don't think a lot of council members are like that, but he really wanted to get down to the nitty gritty, and I like that about him. So that was sort of what moved me at City Hall. At the county, I became very interested in criminal justice reform and substance use and behavioral health, and they're all related. So there's an easy kind of tie there. And then economic development, I think that's tied too. I think if people have jobs and they're not using substances, and their mental health is okay, that they're probably not ending up in the adult detention center, and there's lower crime. So it's all related. And I definitely worked on economic development as a board member for Port San Antonio. Councilman Trevino appointed me to that in 2018, and was proud to make the motion to make Jim Pershbach the CEO. And I think he's been a dazzling success. And then I got interested in the transit issues there too. I traveled with Marisa Bono, who's now at VIA, to Mexico City to learn about the bus rapid transit system on the Reforma, and how public-private partnerships can fill infrastructure gaps that we have. And Mexico City, if Mexico City can figure it out on the Reforma, we can figure it out in San Antonio. And now they have that sales tax money, thanks in part to the work of Marisa Bono and the chair at the time, Hope Andrade, Jeff Arndt. And they have the money. So now we can think innovatively about how do we attract private capital into our transit system, and not think about it the way we always have. I think we need new ideas about how to approach investment in our community. And I think the private sector plays a role. I think Wall Street's going to play a role through bonds, and I think government plays a role. So, all
right, interesting. Now, there's one thing that I really want to talk to you about. That is the opioid crisis, not only here in our area in Bexar County and San Antonio, but our state, probably our nation. And that's something I know you really care about. You also also going to address things like mental health care, prison reform. There's some things that we're going to talk about, but you also are really, people don't know this about you. You're kind of a theology junkie. You know a lot of things about theology. Probably could have gone to seminary and done a great job.
You recommended me to do seminary.
You can apply. Yeah. So we'll talk about that stuff. That's upcoming. We'll talk about it as much as we can. If you have any question for our guest, TJ, you can ask it on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel. Most people watch it on Facebook, and it pops up here. We can see those questions and comments, and get that to you kind of toward the middle of our program. It's going to be about an hour conversation tonight, so we have about 40 minutes left. And just tell us a little bit about how you got into caring about the opioid crisis? Where did you learn this problem existed? How did you learn about it?
So,
and what led you to be such a leader of this?
I'll just be frank with you. I developed kind of substance use issues in my 20s, and you know, I never got arrested or anything like that. That's white privilege, and it's real.
Sure.
You got to recognize that. But I was cleaning it up, and Judge Wolff was becoming increasingly interested in the opioid crisis because it was a hot topic in the 2016 presidential campaign because it was big in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which are the swing states. And then you just started seeing all this action around opioids. You started seeing for the first time that the government was talking about prevention instead of incarceration. And they were talking about treatment instead of incarceration. They're talking about recovery services in a real way where there are dollars involved. Congressman Rogers, I think he's from Kentucky, he's big on this issue, a big leader on Capitol Hill. He said, a vision without funding is a hallucination. So they could talk all they wanted about substance use, but they started spending money in 2017. And that's when Judge Wolff got interested in it, really. But he sponsored the first methadone bill in the Texas legislature in the 70s. So he's been on this issue for 50 years. But we started organizing around the opioid crisis as a broader substance use crisis.
Sure.
But the money from the feds and the state was going to opioids. And all the people that are treating opioids are also treating alcohol. They're also treating cocaine. They're also treating amphetamines. And so we organized around that. We got some criticism, and I think it's rightful criticism, that where were you during the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s? What's the difference between that and the opioid crisis? And I think we all know what the difference between the crack cocaine and the opioid crisis is. And it's what communities were affected and how politically powerful were they. So we were very diligent about ensuring that the resources were allocated to those who needed it most in our work on the opioid task force.
So describe, I mean, for our listeners who may not know, it's opioids are a broad term. Specifically, what are y'all targeting? What types of drugs?
So
what does it mean?
The way the opioid crisis unfolded was that there was a prescription drug crisis in the early 2000s. And then the government entities, various government entities, that includes the legislature, the state legislature, that includes Congress, includes pharmacy boards and so on. They started clamping down on doctors giving you OxyContin, but people had been hooked on it. Let's say somebody was a college athlete and they busted their knee and they've been taking Oxy as a pain reliever, and then Oxy's gone. So they started shooting up heroin, second wave.
Wow.
Then a third wave was fentanyl. You got this synthetic opioid coming in from China and Mexico and worldwide that was way cheaper and more deadly than heroin. And people started using that. It was just a function of the markets and the foreign actors flooding the markets with this new product. Now we're in what they're calling the fourth wave, which is heroin plus methamphetamine. So it's polysubstance use. So there's been like a four times increase in people checking into treatment with amphetamine and opioid use over a few years ago. So we keep seeing the waves, but as far as I'm concerned, the cause is all the same. The cause is trauma. People are trying to escape from their trauma.
Exactly.
And some people use gambling, some people use drugs, some people use sex, some people use shopping addiction, but it's all the same thing. And the consequences are financial, they're social, they're criminal justice consequences. And if we can get prevention into our schools and into our communities and reduce stigma around substance use disorder, well, first of all, you reduce stigma, people are more likely to go to treatment. Stigma is the number one barrier to treatment. Stigma. The second is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the more dollars we spend on prevention, the less we're going to have to spend on treatment. And prevention is way cheaper than treatment in terms of efficacy. So I'll point you to the San Antonio Council on Alcohol and Drug Awareness does prevention work. They do it in our public schools. They're very well, I used to be on their board. It's a great organization. Abigail Moore is the CEO. And then the Clarity Child Guidance Center has a 1 in 5 Minds campaign where they're trying to reduce the stigma around adolescent and pediatric mental health issues. And I'm proud to serve on that board under the leadership of Chair Joanna Weedman. So we've been working on stigma. We've been working on prevention really hard, but we also need to work on treatment and recovery. And that's the expensive part and the hard part, but we're working on the whole spectrum.
That's great. We do have a few comments on this topic, and Kelly Beavers, good to see you, Kelly. It's been a while.
Kelly.
Yeah. She says, TJ, what are a few practical ways people can become more informed about what is happening in their community and get them involved? I don't think this is just about the opioid crisis. It's probably about your way you see in community engagement.
Yeah. So Kelly had a role in introducing me to my wife.
All right. Well, Kelly, but I think she's living in Montana, Bozeman, Montana.
Yeah. So she had the Loop. I don't know if you remember Loop. It was a big civic engagement organization.
It is, yeah.
And we did these forums and stuff. And Laura was co-chair of Forum, and I was helping with it, and that's how we got to be fast pals. But what I would say is get involved with not just boards and commissions, but nonprofits. So like me, I was working for Councilman Nirenberg, but I got involved with Northeast Independent School District. And I was on bond committees, and I ended up on their foundation board, and I ended up vice chairing that board. And you learn about what's happening in all those schools. And if you're paying attention to what's going on at City Hall, I mean, you can just read the agendas. They're online. You can see they're spending $4 million on this. And then you just start poking around and start thinking about it. So, I mean, I would definitely read the newspaper. I'd watch local news, but I think that primary source documents are better than secondary source documents. You learn that in law school. You learn that when you're getting
your theology. You want to be closer to the source.
That's right. Primary source documents. And that's my advice on that.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing is like, you know, growing up in kind of like the church world, you always hear about Paul, you hear about Calvin and Luther, and you read these bigger names, but you never heard about these early apostles, 1 or 2 generations away from Jesus, and they have these writings, whether that's Polycarp or really early church fathers that are just 50 to 100 years after the time of Jesus, and you're thinking, why don't we read these all the time? That seems a much better document.
It's because Paul was a better writer.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and Calvin and Luther, you know, they're thousands of years away.
And they're better writers too.
Yeah, they're better. But man, that was my favorite class in seminary because it was something I didn't know. I mean, you don't hear that, you know, in youth group. You don't talk about that in church. You don't talk about the early church fathers that have these great writings about faith and spirituality, some of them mystically, right? So that's source documents are great. Now, I actually say, Kelly, I think another way to get involved is just to start showing up to things. I mean, showing up is half the battle of going to things, getting into community events, getting involved in even forums like Dream Week or different forums around town that engage. I mean, even watching your show, getting engaged in local politics, understanding will find you great connections. I mean, really, the biggest street of pup theology the past 4.5 years has really, I've been the lucky one. I've really just been able to talk to people involved, and I learn things by just showing up. By listening.
I wrote a commentary in what is now the San Antonio Report 5 years ago called "Speak Up and Show Up and Speak Up." And that's how you get your voice heard. And they do it during the budget process every year at the city. You just fill out a survey, but you learn about how much money we're spending on all this stuff. So that's a good.
And community involvement is a snowball. I remember having Erica Prosper here talking. Really, the talk at the Friendly Spot was about grandparenting, right? And, you know, we didn't think anything grand was going to come off a conversation about grandparenting in San Antonio, but there are people there listening to that and then started an organization with Erica Prosper about grandparenting. They have this whole communal-wide service now to grandparents in San Antonio by just showing up at the Friendly Spot. So I just love just showing up to things and you're not know what's going to happen.
I got a story. My mom might be watching. She may blush when I tell a story. She was part of the Oak Meadow Women's Club in 1989. There wasn't a citywide recycling program then. Wow. So the Oak Meadow Women's Club got together and they formed a recycling program at the old Central Park Mall, which is now Park North. It was a mall parking lot. Nelson Wolff was District 8 councilman. Lila Cockrell was mayor. And they did this big kind of recycling thing, just like a demonstration project. A few years later, we had citywide recycling. Wow. Now, the new generation of leaders in Oak Meadow have a group called Rooted, which is an advocacy group about public education. And they're doing the same thing. They're taking the world by storm, and they're going to change public education in our state because they got organized and mobilized, and there was a network effect from that. So I've seen it just in my neighborhood on 2 issues.
Wow. Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Well, Kelly's a great person, example, getting involved and not. I first met Kelly, I think, when we were both volunteering for Young Life San Antonio 13 years ago. So getting involved, and Kelly.
I went to Frontier Ranch when I was in high school.
You did, yeah. So Sandra here says a vision without funding is an hallucination. Yes. So she was agreeing with your statement there. Let's go back to the opioid issue. Okay. And I want to talk about this a little bit. And that is, there is a lawsuit right now. Talk basic information that you can share. I know there's things you can't share because it's ongoing litigation, but what are things that you've shared publicly? Tell us a little bit about what this lawsuit is about. Why is Bexar County involved?
Right. So we got to go back to the tobacco litigation to really tell this story. So I'm sure people have a vague understanding that like 46 state attorneys general got together and sued the tobacco industry, and they got a $250 billion settlement that's still paying. Yeah. Like University Health System.
Some Baylor Law School is involved. That's how Baylor's new school is even built. It was
a lawsuit that built Baylor Law School. Yeah. Beautiful campus. I almost went there. But so UHS still gets $10 million a year from that lawsuit this year.
Wow.
So the idea was you make a similar claim. So the theory of the case is there wasn't an opioid problem, and then Purdue Pharmaceutical kind of lied to the FDA to get approval for Oxy, and they flooded the airwaves with advertising about the benefits of opioids, and the doctors wrote the scripts, and a bunch of people got addicted. 400,000 people have died since 1999 from opioid overdose, which is a lot. Life expectancy in America has gone down the last couple of years. Substances are a big reason why. The opioid crisis is fueling that, but there are other substances involved. But the claim that the county was making is that we have costs related to incarceration, and costs related to law enforcement, and costs related to economic development as a result of the opioid crisis. And so there are 2,000 government entities throughout the country that have filed these lawsuits. So basically, there's going to be a big pot of money. There's $250 billion in tobacco. It won't be that big. And communities are going to be divvying it up. So the idea was to position yourself to maximize the amount that came to our community. And so I was working on the opioid task force. And at the opioid task force, when I was working at the county, we were thinking about federal grant money and state grant money. We were chasing those federal and state dollars. But we realized there was a treatment capacity issue for substance use in our community. That was abundantly clear. And I mean, I think I was quoted when the lawsuit was filed when I was working for Judge Wolff as saying, this is how we're going to solve our treatment issue. We're going to get money from the lawsuit. So that became a very purpose-driven endeavor. And I was recruited to the law firm to help them because county government's very complex, because you have like 60 elected officials and there's no real accountability in county government. And the money flows in very weird ways. It's not like the city where it's all straightforward. It's very complicated. So the law firm recruited me to do that. And I ended up doing that for a couple of years. But I stayed chairing the opioid task force. I was volunteering with the chamber. Kind of doing all sorts of stuff, going up to the Capitol to testify on needle exchange bills, which was a big holy war for me in 2019. And so it was an interesting experience, but it kind of turned dark on me the last couple months. And so we're still trying to recover from that and move on with our lives, which it's been a lot of intrigue, a lot of gossip, and those who know don't speak, and those who speak don't know. And that's what I'm going to say about that.
That's right. And, it's been tough. When you joined the Phipps law firm, right, with Martin Phipps, and recently you kind of like, you could say, whistleblew some behavior you were seeing in the office place. Tell us what you did, why you came out with that. And we just have one more question to follow up with that. But tell us like that journey when you went over there to continue on with this litigation of opioid use.
It was a financial proposition for me that I couldn't turn down. My gut told me it was the wrong place to go for me. And that's the last time I'm ever going to make a decision for money. And so I was there, but I was working hard on the opioid task force, on stirring up interest in different projects. Like the San Antonio River Authority was looking at doing a property tax to pay for parks projects. And I was working with them on that. So a lot of volunteer work, and ended up when the pandemic hit, was working from home, not really around the office, but my name was put on the building in August of 2020. So I started thinking, well, I need to start paying real attention to what's going on here.
Became a partner. Yeah.
And I never signed paperwork though. So I have no financial firm. And pretty soon thereafter, and this is all public, I started filling out an affidavit to file with the state bar and the authorities. And I started that on September 25th, 2020. And I announced that I was a named partner on September 12th, 2020. So it was within 2 weeks that I was getting really concerned. And I told the state bar, and the reporters have this, I think that it was really a function of greed meets mental health issues meets substance use.
And your complaint was basically that your partner was being inappropriate, not only to women, but to staff, and just kind of had a culture.
He had a room. There were rumors about him being inappropriate, but what I observed, and that was a problem for me, and I regret to the extent that I was a passive observer of that. But I would say that when it became very concerning for me was where there was kind of obvious criminal behavior. There was behavior that was criminal on a white collar and a non-white collar basis, and it became clear that it was just about gathering evidence and waiting till the time was right. But you got to realize, I told law enforcement about the situation there before I left, like 2 minutes before I left the firm, and it took 2.5 to 3 weeks for anybody to investigate. That was only after I tweeted about it. So there was like a long period where there were documentation proving that there were crimes, and nobody took me seriously. That's nobody in town took me seriously. So, I mean, I waited till I had documentation to leave, but people say, why didn't you leave earlier? It's because everybody in town was gaslighting me when I left.
And I guess today there was more information that came out, I guess a back and forth with the current council person saying that basically their idea was that, yeah, you did blow the whistle, but maybe a little too late, that you were more passive about that. What do you say to the critics that say you were part of this, you knew what you're getting yourself into?
They're right.
They're just correct?
They're right. People don't take accountability anymore. We got to start. I'll take accountability. I stayed too long. I let it happen. I was a passive observer. But I can give you a list of a couple people who feel like their lives were saved by the way we left. So if that's not good enough for Manny Plies, I don't know what will be.
All right. Well, I don't want to talk about the specific case, but I want to talk about this theme. I think it's an important theme that we're all in this kind of unique cultural division. Everything is uber sensitive, and sometimes rightly so. That there are some great injustices that happen in our past, and silence has usually been the reason why.
Silence is complicity.
Sure. What are you learning about this culture? What are you learning about how when we see something improper, when we do something improper, none of us are perfect. How do we handle it both kind of privately in our own lives, but also publicly? Like, how public do things need to get to fix an issue that is either happening in our community or maybe sometimes privately within a workplace or a family life?
So I think you try to do it privately, and you just take it more and more public until you get what you need. So we needed SAPD to be investigating Phipps. And once they did, they arrested him within a week. But it took a long time for us to get them to investigate him. But it was pretty quick after that. And so I will say that the final straw for me was the insurrection at the Capitol, where you see how badly things can go and how quickly they can go badly. And then a series of conversations I had with Martin Phipps the day after, and it became abundantly clear it was time to go. And 10 of us resigned pretty much at the same time without jobs lined up against our financial interest. And there's a rule of evidence you learn in law school, which is when people act against their self-interest financially, it means they're doing so for a really good reason. And it's pretty persuasive. And there was a joint letter that a bunch of us signed that kind of protected each of us because there was a concern that he would try to retaliate some way. So, I did stay too long. I probably shouldn't have gone over there to begin with, and they're right about that. I'm sorry to anybody who was hurt by that, but I do feel some degree of self-respect about how we left and how many people were with me when we did it, and the way we were able to find some accountability and justice for the survivors of his behavior. So I mean, that's pretty much what I say about that.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to talk to you honestly about that, and just really about the themes of just this kind of online, behavior, not just online, but through back and forth through social media, or like you said, through Twitter, and how things can sometimes be misunderstood and personalities boil up. And sometimes it's hard for us, watching this information to know what's true. Obviously, more things will come out in the future, and we wish everyone the best, and we hope for justice to be seen. But those are big issues, I think.
My resignation letter from the firm is posted on the San Antonio Report. And I said, he owes me $50,000 and I wanted him to use it to check himself immediately into an inpatient treatment program. I think that's where he belongs. And so, I mean,
sure,
that's what it is.
And that's one issue that we can transition to that. And I thank you for being honest. And we weren't trying to sugarcoat anything. We wanted to speak honestly. Obviously, we learned about this, maybe an hour or two ago. Yeah. We were originally just going to talk about the opioid crisis, and we still will. But one thing about that is mental health. You talk about trauma care and just the trauma that not only in my world in dealing with people on the streets.
Yeah.
Treatment of homelessness is 100% trauma care.
Yeah.
It's various stages of trauma. It's how we treat that trauma to get them out of homelessness. Obviously, with people who have addictions, people who struggle with many forms of addictions or mental health care also need to treat that trauma. When you speak about,
can I speak about that?
Yeah.
So it's on my Twitter now. I went through some trauma when I was a kid, and it really kind of jacked me up there for a while. And I started going to counseling in August of 2019, and that my counselor recommended a book called The Body Keeps Score, which is basically the Bible for trauma research. And it teaches you that trauma survivors, and I've experienced this today when I saw what the statement was, you feel it in your body in a way that other people don't. And you do whatever you can to deflect that. So for some people, they drink a lot. I've been that guy. For some people, they eat a lot. I've been that guy. For some people, they smoke a lot of pot. I've unfortunately been that guy in the past. And, people who don't have the advantages that I feel like I've had, which is a loving family. My father was a physician. I'm a white guy. I had every advantage in the world. So I was suffering privately, but was able to kind of get away with it because of the privilege. But if I was growing up on the East Side, I would have ended up in jail, and it would have been a different course of action for me. So I think that my mission is to make sure that everybody has the resources that I had in dealing with my issues, and they don't end up in jail, and that they're able to get a second chance at life, and that they're able to go get one of the jobs that we're trying to bring to Port San Antonio in advanced manufacturing or aerospace or cybersecurity, that they get the training they need. That's why I was such a big supporter of Mayor Nirenberg's Ready to Work SA program, the sales tax initiative that passed with 77% of the vote. So we need behavioral health innovation. And I think Sheriff Salazar announced his task force on mental health at the jail. Yeah. I think that's a huge start. I mean, that is bold thinking. And the way he's talking about it, it's like that would change the game in our community forever. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with that.
No, and we all go through these things. Even a few years ago, I went through a rough patch in my life, and I went to a week program, like a centeredness program. It was kind of like a rechecking in, and you meet with a counselor in a small group each and every day. And mine was more about just emotions and codependency and things like that. But one thing that I saw when I was at this camp, right, is everyone was privileged. I mean, the whole place. I mean, mental health care. Everyone at least had some type of means. And if somebody was on scholarship there, it was because they were closely related to somebody who has means. And so when I see mental health care, what's holding us back for people truly receiving the mental health care?
Housing first. So what we're working on, I'll tell you about a person who in our community that does more for marginalized populations than anybody I've ever met.
Okay.
Her name's Dr. Lisa Cleveland.
Okay.
She's a nurse practitioner at UT Health School of Nursing. And she partnered, I met her through the Opioid Task Force, and she partnered with Crosspoint to build Casa Mia, which is a housing facility for women whose babies were born with neonatal abstinence syndrome, which means that they were using opiates while pregnant. And there's a very special kind of care they need. So 5 years ago, the instinct reaction was CPS takes the kid away from the mom. But is that good for the kid?
Mm-hmm.
No. So you go to Casa Mia, and it's like in Monte Vista. You go to Casa Mia, and they have women there who are getting wraparound services. They have housing. They have educational programming. And that's like I'm getting chills talking about it, because it's like that. They are changing people's lives every day there. And it was her idea. U.S. News and World Report covered it. And Lloyd Doggett, the congressman, has been really supportive of it. So that's the first thing that Lisa Cleveland's working on. Second thing is what we're calling the Women's Wellness Campus. And that's a 40-bed institution, 40-bed health center. They just got zoning approval on the east side, and it's going to be kind of targeting the population of vulnerable women who have substance use disorders, who are survivors of domestic violence, who are homeless, and they're able to go. They stay there, housing first, and then they get the wraparound services, and hopefully a pipeline to job placement through like a Restore Education or an institution like that. So I think that housing first is the way we solve mental health and behavioral health and substance use issues. And I'll say that aligns with what you're doing. I live downtown. I live by Madison Square Park. I see the impact you have and your homeless outreach work has every day. And that brings me to something I kind of want to say while I'm on the show that's not completely related. I think that Becca McNeil, you and I were speaking earlier. She's
my co-host usually.
Yeah. She wrote the greatest article I've ever read in San Antonio, the What High School Did You Go To article. I suggest everybody look it up.
Yeah.
She has talked a lot about the lack of faith community, or the diminishing presence of the faith community. And I agree with her, and I'll take her a step further, which is we're seeing a diminishing presence of civil society. So you have government institutions, you have capital or private organizations, and you have civil society. And all three need to be kind of in an equilibrium for our society to work. I think that's what you saw generally, not for everybody, for a period of time after World War II. But we're losing civil society. We're losing that church culture that has existed. Not everybody, but we're losing membership. And it's being replaced by other functions of civil society like Orange Theory and Peloton and all that's good. But I think we're losing the bonds that connect us to each other that aren't financial and aren't political. And I think that leads to a bifurcation, and that you start speaking past each other. And I think that creates an enormous,
Interesting,
gradual, but then sudden decay in trust and political stability.
yeah,
And exhibit A is the insurrection. And, you know, my wife will roll her eyes when she hears me say this on your show. But I've been thinking for a long time that what we're seeing in America right now is what you saw with the decline of the Roman Empire, which is increasing inequality. It's a more plutocratic class, elected leadership who doesn't follow the rule of law, and a decadent, decaying culture. And I feel like we've sort of seen some of that lately. And those are elements that were there with the fall of the Roman Empire. They were there for the fall of the Russian Empire before the Revolution of 1917. They were there for the fall of the monarchy in France with the French Revolution, which was pretty grotesque stuff. So we have these elements in place in American society, and that's where we get to change the world around you. We can't change what's going on in DC, really, you can't. But Andres Andujar is running the hemisphere redevelopment, and he has a great saying. I love it. He said, "I can't change the world, but I can change my block."
Yeah.
And if we all just concentrate on our block, and there's an old saying about a guy who's walking down the street and he picks up some trash, and the neighbor says, "Hey, why are you picking up the trash? You can't pick up all the trash in the world." He said, "I can pick up the trash I see." And so that's sort of been a guiding principle of mine as I've gone through my career is how can we build better trail networks so that people can get healthier? How can we, I was on the university health board, how can we expand telehealth so that people that don't have transportation can call in on their phone and get the preventative services they need? So that's sort of what we've been really thinking about in my family is how can we change the world around us?
Nice. And you know, I feel like, you know, you're speaking some of the things I would love to talk about. If we had more time, we could probably do another whole pulp theology on this topic.
Hey, we should, man.
Yeah. But one thing about this faith, this idea of faith, right? It boils up, right? We're probably going to hear a lot of it in this election for mayor. Faith communities are going to be divided of who they support. Faith communities are going to be maybe neutral. They don't know what to do. How do faith communities re-engage in this type of world? How does a faith community in such a divisive political world even feel safe to step in and say, you know what,
I will say that the faith community has been there for the most massive transformations in American political life. And the faith community needs to be engaged. So if you read Taylor Branch's series of books about America during the King years, it's a very comprehensive biography of Martin Luther King. You see that the faith community played an enormous role.
Sure.
And everybody knows that he was a preacher, but just how enormous of a role the faith community played in the struggle for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And I mean, you go back even further, the fight against slavery. And I'm using sort of social justice, racial justice themes because that's what's on people's minds right now.
Yeah.
And I think the faith community has to mobilize. We saw it with the needle exchange program. Bexar County has had statutory authority from the Texas legislature to create a needle exchange program since 2007. We did it for the first time in 2019. You want to guess where it's being run?
Yeah.
St. Luke's Baptist Church.
Yeah.
Pastor Joe Barber. And the way we set it up is people come in, they're mostly homeless folks or on the verge of homelessness. They get food, they get basic wound care from the UIW students.
That's great.
Of osteopathic medicine. Pastor Joe will do some religious counseling with them. And then they'll do a needle exchange where they get condoms, they get clean needles, they get Narcan, which is an overdose reversal. In 1 year, that program reversed 300 overdoses. That's 300 lives saved by the needle.
Yeah, and I would imagine at some point the faith community was probably against something like this, but over time they slowly learned to be trusting.
That brings me to a point that I was hoping we'd be able to talk about, which is how do you communicate with different audiences? And there's a book I like called The Three Languages of Politics, and it's basically the basic gist of it is that different people are talking about the same issues, but on different wavelengths, so they're not even talking to each other.
Sure.
So
I think that's the biggest problem we have right now.
It's a huge problem we have.
Yeah.
The needle exchange, our syringe services program is a politically correct term. It's good on the public health. You reduce HIV and hepatitis C, it's a big deal. You reduce overdoses, that's a big deal. But it also saves enormous taxpayer dollars because a 10-cent needle can save you $80,000 in hepatitis treatment. And so if you can't appeal to people's sense of decency, if they don't believe in the science, appeal to their self-interest. Sure. And that's a political lesson I've learned the hard way over time. And so I would just urge people to be thinking about, okay, there are social justice ramifications to what we're talking about. There are also financial ramifications. And there are also social or religious ramifications. So think along all of those frameworks, and you can find a way to persuade the person you're talking to that maybe you're not going to agree, but they're not the devil. And right now we think everybody who's against us is the devil. And you know what? They're usually not.
Yeah.
Some aren't, but are great people you want to hang out with. But at least you can come together in goodwill and exchange ideas in a way that American democracy was designed to exchange ideas.
You know, in the last maybe 25 years, I've seen the more conservative Christian camps not be afraid to dive into politics. And in the last 25 years, more progressive Christianity, a few do, right? And it's becoming maybe more and more involved now. But there was a while where I think the progressive Christian crowd was kind of hesitant. Like they didn't want to do what the other side was doing and use their faith in any type of political manipulation and it's not manipulative. Like if people really believe and they need to be engaged in fighting for social justice and what is right and what is the common good. Is the common good the needle exchange program where we might think, oh, that's just encouraging drug use, and we're of course against drug use.
It reduces drug use.
That's right.
Increases access to treatment.
So where are the talking points that the faith community is saying?
Who gave me those talking points? Colleen Bridger. First time I met her, she said we need a needle exchange program, and my thought was political brain, never going to get that. She sat there and she taught me through it, and I was convinced. And I figured if she can convince me, we can convince enough people that we need this program. And it was $80,000.
No, Ryan Holland, a good friend of mine in Chicago, did this before he came to San Antonio, and really talked to me about it when he moved here. It's such an important thing, and this even talks about other social issues that the faith community will just so be against by just their sheer stubbornness and kind of miss out what the common good is. We don't have much time left, but there's a few things. If you want to have a question for TJ about opioid crisis here in San Antonio, or mental health care, or trauma care, or the needle exchange program, please ask those questions. We have a few minutes left with him. But one thing that we have in common is we talked about this is just our kind of love for theology. One book you mentioned, and you gave us a lot of books to talk about tonight. We can't get through all of them, but one is that we can definitely speak on is the book, The Language of God by Francis Collins, who's Dr. Francis Collins, who's a PhD and is MD. He's also the director of the National Institutes of Health. He got appointed by Obama, stayed on through the Trump administration, is now stayed on through the Biden administration. So I don't know if a person in the NHS has stayed on that long, but obviously Dr. Fauci works for Francis Collins. Francis Collins first was famous for a couple of things, but his biggest thing early on was that he decoded the genome, like the Genome Project. Big deal with another person, and got an award through President Bill Clinton, and wrote a book after that experience and before he was at the NIH, and that's called The Language of God. Why do you like that book? And we'll talk about it more.
Point we were just talking about, because there's this idea that science and religion can't coexist, and you got the guy that mapped the human genome talking about his faith.
Sure. If
he can do it, anybody who believes in science can do it.
No, it's a great book. I actually have a painting. I was going to probably put it up here, but I didn't have time to go to the office. And it's a painting that I have that was actually painted in a Francis Collins talk to a bunch of youth pastors. Like I used to 10 years ago, I was a youth pastor, and he came and spoke in this national convention, and he spoke about the Genome Project. He talked about the faith and science and promoting things like evolution within our faith. And of course, half the crowd probably was totally lost or didn't care or angry because if you mention things. But one thing that he talked about was in this idea, there's this idea in the creationism, right? This kind of like old school view of creationism that what is unknown, the eyeball is so mysterious. The flower is so mysterious.
The
sunset, that God is found in the unknown, right? It's irreducible complexity.
A lot more was unknown to Moses than is unknown to us.
That's right. Well, the scientists one time, they said in catechism, they would use the flower as that example. The flower is so beautiful, God has to create it because we don't know how it works. Well, then he was the scientist that figured out pistils and stamens and all this stuff. And he was like, oh man, I blew my own mystery. I killed God. God was in the mystery of this flower. Right. Now that I know, is God still there? And it's called the God of the Gaps theory. And Francis Collins talks about this and says how it's bogus theology, that God is found in the known and the unknown, right? God doesn't get smaller the more we learn of the things we don't know. So God is found everywhere in our love, in our community, in the things around us, in the nature around us, in the beauty around us, in the worship around us.
And in love that we have for each other.
Exactly.
It's my grandmother was a theology major at Baylor in the 50s.
Wow.
And she said, God is love.
God is love.
And that was her bottom line.
And if you make something that God is only found in the unknown because it's a really good talking point, it can sell books, it can sell creationism books, it can sell all this stuff. And it's so convincing because that's where our heart usually lingers, is the unknown. So it's attractive to us, but it's also a very damning theology when it plays out in real life, because if you put all your chips in something unknown and it's no longer unknown, what do you do with your chips? What do you do with your faith?
There's a confirmation bias that people have too. So if something comes to them that doesn't conform to their belief system, they're less likely to believe it. And this is a well-behaved behavioral economic theory. And then you start thinking, you start gaslighting yourself, and it kind of devolves from there. And I think we've seen that in politics, we've seen it in religion, we've seen it everywhere. So,
and one of your other favorite, for a few more minutes left, your other favorite person, St. Augustine, City of God. Tell us your favorite. What's your favorite theme out of that book?
Well, my favorite. So I was going to go on the Roman Empire thing.
Okay.
That's where the City of God came in.
Yeah, yeah.
I've already done my bit.
You already did that.
But I'll tell you, as somebody who struggled in his life, I'll tell you, Lord, make me chaste, but not quite yet.
Not quite yet.
I really hung on to that "not quite yet" part for 15 years, but I really related to that, and just a really great thinker.
More of his confessional there. That's my favorite book. Is his Confessions?
Yeah, that's from the Confessions, right? Yeah, and so that's what I like about him. That's
good. So TJ, thanks for coming on. I know it's been a crazy few weeks, not only for you personally and your family and your firm, and starting a new firm, and still dealing with this opioid lawsuit and how that's going to play out in the next few weeks. I know that you've embroidered yourself into some great hard conversations. So thank you for coming on and
strongest steel is forged through the fires of hell, and I've learned that the hard way. So.
Yeah, and I have mutual friends on both sides of this issue, and this is the hard thing about living in a community, is that you're not always going to get along, and there's going to be some hard things to talk about. And those things are serious. And so if more serious conversations come out of this, we'd love to have you back on and talk more, as things can be more talked about in the future. So what is your last thing here? I know you have to go to another forum for District 10
forum.
So
Ezra Johnson's hosting a Zoom town hall on regulatory reform at ERCOT. And so he asked me to speak to that group, given my experience in the industry. I'm more than happy to. I had some strong thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So that's,
and let's connect. We have a medical clinic at Cortisone that operates twice a week with doctors and nurses and med students and pre-med students, and people can receive primary care. And we've done obviously we pass out condoms, we pass out a bunch of free supplies. But one thing that we've done in the past, and I would love to do more regularly, is probably more of a needle exchange program. So let's connect with that. I've written it down to connect with
Lisa
you.
Cleveland, you two will do.
I got it right here.
Things and save lives
Lisa
together.
Cleveland. I wrote it down.
She's one of my favorite people.
Now, at the end of the Jerry Springer show, which maybe your life feels like right now.
Where's Steve? I need Steve in my life to break it up.
At the very end of the Springer show, we talk about this in Pup Theology a lot. Have you ever seen the end of the Springer show, the old one, that he gave this 2-minute, really insane conclusion that was almost like a sermon?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So what is your last conclusion here? What are you, from your idea that things need to start locally, that we can be, if we really want to change the world around us, we change it from the community?
The only way the American experiment can succeed is if we start taking seriously the rule of law. And we need to do that in all aspects of our life. And we need to call people out when they're abusing their power. And we need to call people out who are abusing their power in corporate contexts, in the way they treat their employees, in political power, and interpersonal relationships.
If people want to learn more about the opioid crisis and the things that get involved, tell us a little bit, what are the places they can go?
I'd go to Dr. Jennifer Potter runs a really tight ship at the Long School of Medicine, where they do great research on this. Lisa Cleveland. And then, the Center for Healthcare Services will have some good information too. But that's more for people who are struggling.
Okay. That's great. And there's also this new program talking about trauma care. And we had it on a few weeks ago, maybe months ago now. It's kind of a crazy few weeks. Bridges of Care. It's kind of a project through NAMI and through the city of San Antonio, the DHS office, some other organizations that I'm going to forget right now. But what it is, it's training people in nonprofits and faith-based organizations, regular lay people, not necessarily clergy or professionals, to get trained in trauma response and mental health care response, where they can be kind of an advocate, right? And sometimes there's a Stephen minister programs in certain churches that do, like chaplaincy work and caring work. This is kind of like that, but you're getting trained. You're a mental health champion to better understand the issues of trauma and mental health in the neighborhood around you. And so you can be a better coach to people to get them in the right direction. It's called Bridges to Care. I highly encourage lay people to get involved.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
We're talking the same language.
That's great. So look it up. It's run by NAMI and a few other great people. And Christ Episcopal Church is taking the lead on that with a few other leaders. And great work. So is that it? Is any more lasting words of wisdom from TJ? I know we're short. This is one of our shorter pup theologies. Look, 58 minutes. So we have 2 minutes left. Any lasting comments that the wise words of TJ?
The words of Edward Murrow.
Okay.
Good night and good luck.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you for turning in. It's kind of a shorter pup theology tonight, but we really wanted to get back into a rhythm. TJ and I planned this really quickly after the freeze. We wanted to get back into normal life. We really appreciate all you watching. Please share this video when you can, and we'll have you back to talk more about these issues, and probably bring back Dr. Lisa Cleveland to talk about more of these issues in our community.
She's someone to watch.
Okay, we have her down. Check out any past pup theology online on YouTube and mainly on Facebook. That's where most people engage. I wish we could move beyond that, but that's where we are now. When you don't have much of a budget, this is what we get. But we really love it.
I'm in public television, man. I know all about it.
And check it out tomorrow night. You're interviewing 7 o'clock on KLRN.
Williams is first. Watch it. It's a good interview.
And if you're wondering what KLRN is, it's the PBS station, and it's the local PBS station. And you're going to have some great conversations with the chairwoman of the CPS.
Yeah, the president and CEO of CPS. Fix SAPD, who's trying to repeal collective bargaining. San Antonio River Authority about the San Pedro Creek. Ben Olivo about homelessness and your work. And then Sanford Nowland about ERCOT regulation.
Great. Look at that. Keeping up with the city. Thank you, TJ. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll be back in the weeks to come here as we can. We're going to try to find other places to be and to start getting back to normal, but we'll be online until it's safe to be back. So thank you to tuning in to Pup Theology. They're saying here, we got one thing. It says, this is a good place to end. Jamie, thank you. My 8-year-old son is always asking me this. If God really made everything, then who made him? How do I answer this? I'm going to answer your question real fast. You answer then by talking about love. Everybody understands what love is about. So God is love. You know, a lot of people ask me, what is hell? Right? The opposite of that question. And I always say, you know what? It's the absence of God's love. Right? You can start talking to your 8-year-old about what love is and experiencing love. Do you understand your love that you have for each other? Do you understand that you want to be loved by God fully and you want to be appreciated and fully a whole? I think that's how you start talking about God. You don't have to go into deep theology. You don't have to go into really much. You just speak about what you experience around you. And that is the love that we have that is universal, that it is felt and transcended throughout time. So I think that's a great place to start. That's not a cop-out answer. I'm not trying to sound, politically correct or cheesy here. I really think, Jamie, that's how you speak about it, because I think everybody, even your 8-year-old son, understands what love is and how do we express that love correctly in appropriate ways. And maybe that's what God really is all about. And those touch points of faith, hope, and the greatest of these is love. So thank you, Jamie, for that question. Thank you for joining in. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
We'll have you back. Good luck in the weeks to come. Our pleasure with you and everybody involved in a very tough situation that's probably not pleasant to go through, but that's just the idea of living in community in our life together. So thank you for creating the common good. We'll see you next week.